This is Dan Schneider on this Dan Schneider video interview. It is the second in my Filmmakers on Film. John Fitzpatrick is the filmmaker before you, and my conversation with him will begin in a moment. John Fitzpatrick is a filmmaker whose work I came across online on some YouTubes and Vimeo sites, and I wanted to talk to him because I saw especially a short film of his called Skype Mail, which I thought was a cut above most of the films in that vein, horror films in that vein that you'll find online. So welcome, John. Let me just ask you if you could take a few minutes, give me a little background of who you are, where you come from, what your filmic interests when you were young are, and how they've affected you going to the present.
Okay, yeah. Well, I've been introduced. John Fitzpatrick. I grew up in a small town called Gig Harbor, Washington, near Seattle, and that's filmmaking. It started very young. I remember very vividly. I saw The Making and Return of the Jedi. I think it was NBC or ABC, something like that, broadcasted it, and I immediately liked the process of filmmaking, the idea of creating this illusion based on several shots, building things, and what it really looked like. You know, they're all puppets, and all of that became very fascinating to me. So I just kind of started with little video cameras, lots of kids did back then, and just dabbling in various stories. I could only tell a lot of things from point of view, almost kind of like Blair Witch style. Early on, because I didn't have a whole ensemble of friends that wanted to operate camera plus act. So, you know, it'd be like two friends at a time or one friend at a time. So we just make these little videos every weekend, and that's kind of how it started. And then I never shook the bug. I just kept doing it, pursuing it through high school. Then eventually went to college. I went to Montana State University, and then I moved to California and kept doing it here. So.
Well, let me ask about the types of films as a child that you watched. Were you watching like Elvira horror films, or were you watching all sorts of films? Were you watching foreign films? Were you watching The French Connection? What kind of films interested you?
I ran the gamut of everything. I was certainly watching Tales from the Crypt. I was watching Poltergeist, of course, Raiders of the Lost Ark. And then that was very young, like when I was very young, I guess, 7, 8, 9, Gremlins, they had a cool little Untitled Chapter called Amazing Stories. I watched that. And then as I started to get into, I guess preteen and teen, I started discovering, the filmmaker as entrepreneur, I guess, for lack of a better word. Mm-hmm. A lot of my experience had been Spielberg or Lucas, their things, because they were so heavily influential when you're a kid, and so as I matured, I started paying attention to other people like Scorsese, Truffaut, because Truffaut was in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and I realized he was a filmmaker. I started watching like Wall Street, Talk Radio, Breathless. I started seeing, Raging Bull, Taxi Driver. So the scope of things I was watching started to grow within certain restrictions, because the ratings were still a little too high for me to see. I was only 13 or 14, and then I just kind of kept growing as I moved through high school and could watch, Last Tango in Paris and things like that started coming up when I got to be older. So yeah, it was kind of a little bit of everything. I kind of just was studying what different people did, the power of camera and its movement. The directors that just focused on more like on acting versus flashy cinematography or editing, like Oliver Stone. One of my favorite movies was JFK. I really enjoyed reconstructing how all these people in different ways. It kind of was a broad bump out. I was sort of consuming as much as I could.
Well, you mentioned before we started recording that you were never an actor, because some filmmakers start out wanting to be actors. So was it more along the line that you were drawn to film sort of because of the way you could juxtapose images, or did you want to tell like stories, or what name 3 or 4 filmmakers that most resonated with you, or 3 or 4 films that you think are the most influential in your outlook on cinema.
Oh, wow, that's fun. Well, the first part of the question is, I was drawn to it because of storytelling. I wrote before I started filming because it was hard to get the means together to film back then. Was very difficult, and that, I mean, VHS cameras were just coming out, so it was not everybody had one all the time. So it wasn't. I wrote stories mostly, short stories or longer ones. So I was more interested in storytelling, and then I discovered as I moved through that there are different ways to tell a story. And I think just most non-academic, like, I guess, to be completely pure about it, the filmmakers that got me most interested when I was youngest were the ones that were most heavily marketed. So that would have been certainly Spielberg, Oliver Stone, Martin Scorsese, Joe Johnston, and later Tarantino, but he came on the scene a little later, and Steven Soderbergh. So those were my first experience into it, and understanding that there was this person called a director, and they sort of crafted the storytelling from the visual perspective. And then, of course, I went into school and started learning about, Howard Hawks, Billy Wilder, the classic people that you end up studying, and realizing you could study it and go backwards and watch all of these other movies and see that the newer filmmakers just in fact borrowed from them a lot, and so yeah, that's kind of where.
You mentioned writing screenplays. There are sort of 2 schools of thought about that. Alfred Hitchcock sort of famously said that once he worked out a script or a screenplay in his mind, the major work was done. Just filming it was then he already had it in his head. Other directors, like a John Cassavetes most famously, would like to have those little moments while filming that were unexpected to add to a film. Do you gravitate towards one or the other?
It depends. I've done both. In fact, relatively soon here we'll be releasing kind of an experimental film called Reflex. And that was all done more like you're saying, Cassavetes or Terrence Malick. We went to a location. There was a scenario that was thought of a sort of a boy meets girl scenario. And then it was invent what happens. And then we just were there to capture what the actors perform. And I would do little things like I hid a gun in somebody's purse or whatever, and then they'd have to find it. And you kind of create a scenario around it and see where it goes. And there's an addiction and something very fascinating about that process. There's a purity to it. There's a lack of polish and sort of what you have to do to create a story, but also just let the things breathe is very interesting. And there's an addiction I have to that lack of predictability. And I think certain films or certain scenes, even if you had a more scripted film, work really well if you give the actors that room. And then if you're doing something like horror, there isn't to say that you can't do horror that way. There's certainly a valid way to do that. But if you're talking more classic cinema, I think the Hitchcock method of you plan it and you know it and you just have to execute it. There's a different craft to that is also very valid and fun to do. It's how well can you execute the move or the thing and keep the audience in your control. Always steering the ship. That is it's also very interesting and very difficult to do. You have to really think about it. It's not just luck of the draw. If you're going to be really good at it, you can actually really control that. Go, where are you going? This is where I want you to go. I want you to think. This is what I'm programming you to believe, and then I'm going to change it, or I'm going to not do that, or I am going to do it just in a way you don't expect. And that in and of itself is its own art form. So I think they're both valid. Which one do I prefer? I think, like I said, it really depends. Like, I'm a storyteller, so if my mood is I want to just go out and do something more immediately and just see where it goes and be very experimental. I do a lot of movies. I film a lot all the time. I'll do other ones depending on the crew, depending on who I'm working with, depending on how I feel, on the day. Sometimes I want to just not think about it that much. To say, well, what's this scenario lead to? Let's get in the car. Let's drive up the 101 freeway. What happens? And you just sort of do this really personal thing about people, and that's interesting.
Well, film is a collaborative art and medium. You have the actors, you have the people behind the scenes, the director, would be the putative head of the project. And there are a couple of ways that filmmakers have famously thought about that. Again, going back to Hitchcock, he thought actors were highly replaceable. They were like cattle. Someone like a French filmmaker, Robert Bresson, used a lot of non-actors to get a certain effect, whereas other directors like Orson Welles or Ingmar Bergman often actively encouraged participation, co-creation with their actors. If an actor came up to you and said, I just don't feel this scene is working right, if I came in from stage right instead of stage left, if I did this or that, are you open to those kinds of suggestions?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you have to be a lot of times, especially when you don't have complete control over, if you're shooting in a lot of live locations or you're shooting in, a real house versus a set that you've built. I think if you plan a lot and you get into everything's built and everything's crafted that way, you still can do that. But I think when you're in real places, you have to be aware of that natural ebb and flow. I mean, somebody might feel like that's weird to come from the bathroom area versus the dining room or whatever. If that helps them, I guess the general rule would be as long as it's not damaging the story. Like if it's obvious the story is based on they just disposed of something in the bathroom and it needed to be the bathroom and they want to come out of the kitchen, unless you want to start rewriting everything live right then and there, which I guess you could do on an independent film if you're in a studio scenario or if you're on a television show scenario. That's a little harder because that's not what the parties agreed to make, So you can be flexible, but as long as it's not going to wreck the story, as long as you're not taking page 3 and throwing it out because somebody feels like they want to walk in another direction. I don't think it's valid, and I don't think a professional actor would do that. They would say, okay, well, I got to make this work. And I don't have that problem very often, where they want to just change everything based on a whim. But certainly if they need to play with something, have something in their hands, don't want to sit, instead they want to stand, they want to pace instead of be, at a desk, or they want to be at the desk then move because they just feel like, and they want to rework the blocking. Oh, that's fine. That's part of doing it. You'll get a better performance, you'll get a better scene. Suddenly you'll find, wow, this scene really popped to life, and it was just supposed to be this expository moment of two things. Wow, this changed because this guy or girl wanted to do this. So, yeah, absolutely.
Well, we're recording this now in 2017, and throughout most of the 20th century, films, were first with the Hollywood studio, and as technology has become cheaper, I look online, I can find a lot of effects, especially in like little sci-fi shorts or horror shorts, that are better than a lot of studio stuff 25, 30 years ago. So let me ask you about being an independent filmmaker early in the 21st century. Let me just start with sort of the film festival route. I've interviewed a few independent filmmakers, and most of them are not particularly keen on sort of the Sundance and all these film festivals. A lot of them think that they're just sort of money-making things, and they're looking for new ways of distributing their films rather than going to a film festival. What is your take on film festival route? Does it help or aid younger independent filmmakers, or do you go a different way?
There's sort of multiple parts to that, and I guess the answer is it depends. festivals can be very valid for a number of reasons, and then for the same reasons that you talked about, they can be sort of a stick in the mud. So I would say, to break it down into simple, inner workings of it. The first thing is that depending on your needs for a festival, like if you're a lot of towns have festivals and a lot of communities have festivals, so there's no shortage of them to apply to. If you're like, we do Scream Fest locally here in Los Angeles, Shriek Fest, and some of them a lot, and those are fun. We're never doing them in order to feel like we're discovered per se. We do them for the camaraderie of the community here. You meet people that way. It gives you a face and a community involvement, whereas there might be a little bit more anonymity online or a lack of understanding who the filmmaker is. It's basically like this interview is giving people an opportunity to know me. Well, a panel discussion does the same for the community here, or the festival directors, or anybody that might be looking to work with you on something. Just kind of opens up things in a more relaxed atmosphere, or less you have to reach out with emails and things. So for those reasons, and the camaraderie of it, it's fantastic. And for the community experience of it, and the theatrical experience of it, seeing what an audience does and how they react. I love going and sitting back and watching. If there's 150 people at the same time watching your project and reacting to it, you take different notes than you do versus an online interaction. So if you're doing it for those reasons, I think they're valuable, and you should probably submit to most of the ones that you can make it to, so you can experience that and watch it. And you should probably be submitting to the ones that will give you that, at least an audience of that level. The other side of that is, sure, if you really, like when we release things online on our YouTube channel, a lot of times in an hour we can get the same amount of views that one audience at the festival will. So if you're just after people watching it and views and notoriety and the ability to have a large audience, festivals, that's probably not that big of a deal, and all you are really doing is, you've paid money, you've done this thing, and you're not, you might not be gaining as much as you would like. So if that's the reason you're doing it, or for just notoriety, certainly online is a very valid place. You can get an audience fairly quickly these days, and you can service them, and you can tailor to them, and you can interact with them. So for those reasons. And then the third thing would be competition. While there's a lot of competition online and standing out is its own set of difficulties, that is just the case. There is thousands online, so it can be very difficult to stand out, and equal in film festivals. But if you are standing out, I think it's valid. Like, I think if you're criticizing a Sundance or a bigger film festival, which is valid, at the same time, if you're wanting to be mainstream or stand out or competitive, it's sort of like, I guess I look at it like college. If you're trying to get into Harvard, it's extremely difficult, or trying to get into NYU, or if you're trying to get into a top school. It's the same for a festival. There's that level of competition. So if that's what you endeavor to do and you want to be that competitive, you should probably not rule it out. It's a valid competition, you know. But if you don't want to be that competitive and you want to just service your own audience and you have your own voice and you want to seek alternative ways, I think you should do it that way. Yeah, I mean, it just depends on your personal needs and goals. If you want a goal to be a Sundance filmmaker or a prominent indie filmmaker that's mainlined into that community, then analyze what gets in and really try and beat it and do it. You know, I think that's the it's like trying out for the team. You know, you've got to kind of do it. But if you are your own personal filmmaker and you say, I have a message and I have a voice of what I like to say, and this is what I believe, and I have people that enjoy it, by all means, and nobody accepts you, who cares? Do your thing then and service those people and say, no, you like my voice, you like what I'm making, here it is, and I don't need a festival to do it. So I think both avenues are valid depending on what you as a filmmaker want to accomplish.
Well, you mentioned the word "we," so let me ask you: are you a film director for hire, or do you have your own production company? Do you to make money? Do you direct commercials? Do you do video enhancement work or whatnot? What is your company? Who is behind you? What is the apparatus that you have?
Okay, so I operate typically like any other film. Like each film that we do, if we do a larger one, has its own company, and then that company closes when the film is finished. So I don't per se. I'm exploring starting my own production company that would just run year in and year out at this point. As whether or not the expense in doing so would be valid. As I get more work in an independent filmmaker level, but loosely we have. What I mean by we is there's a group of us. We're 6 friends. We do an online series called Scary Endings. We do it once a month. Some of the films are like nightmare, and others are just a little bit more of just a jump scare exercise. But the main thing is it's sort of the idea is we do it once a month, come hell or high water, and it's the first weekend you shoot, the second weekend you edit, the third weekend you polish and launch, no matter what. So sometimes things don't get finished, but it tells us where our instincts are in a story sense, where our instincts are on how to do it, and it gives a limit to what you have to do. And so it's more of an exercise and a way to. I have this comparison I give younger people a lot, like filmmaking can be like a pickup game of basketball, like one-on-one in an alleyway or on a backyard or whatever, or baseball or whatever sport you might do. You can do the same thing, and you need to practice. It's sort of like a sketchbook, or if you're an artist that likes to draw, you need to draw. If you're an author, you like to write, you need to write. Well, the sad part about filmmaking is nothing so complicated, but you do need to film. You need to constantly film. You need to try new techniques. You need to push yourself, things that you might not be confident in, and you shouldn't have to wait till somebody gave you $20,000 or 15 or 10 or 50 or whatever it is to try and experiment with it. You should just be experimenting on your own for what resources you have. So that's sort of what I mean by we do them all the time. So they're out online. We go to festivals. We do whatever we want with them. Like if we think one's a great festival movie, we'll send it to a festival. If we don't think it's a festival movie, we don't do it. We just, that should just live online and be here, and we'll promote it through these places and see what people say. And we take feedback and things like that. And that kind of started with Nightmare, because that did really well online. And I decided, well, I want to keep following up and seeing what people say. So that's what I mean by we. What I do for a living, I'm an editor for a living. I edit on the television show Supernatural for the CW. And so I work in a filmmaking capacity just on the post end.
Well, let me ask, since you are working with one of the networks, even though it's one of the less or minor networks, do you then, when you work with actors, are they mostly college kids, or do you work with SAG actors?
When on my own projects, you mean?
Yeah.
It runs it depends. Yes, we'll work with SAG actors. The SAG actors, then you have more contracts that you need to deal with. So there'll be SAG in those cases. In other cases, no, there'll be college kids. There'll be newer. There'll be it's whoever we have the time to work with, or whoever's available. And that on something like Scary Endings, but like on other, I guess for lack of a better word, like marquee projects, we like something like Brentwood Strangler or like Nightmare. Yeah, that's SAG, and then we go through the contracts and the agreements and the things like that you just that you have to do. So just depending on the project depends on how formal is not the right word. How much we go through. You know, certain ones we do and certain ones we don't.
Well, I want to get to talk about some of the films of yours that you've done in a minute, but I got a couple of other questions. The first is, let me just talk a little bit about YouTube. You mentioned having a YouTube channel, and I know that online, Vimeo is considered more of the filmmaker's channel. Do you find a difference between those films, either that you and your associates have put on Vimeo versus YouTube? YouTube being sort of more dramatic, Vimeo being more, I guess, artsy filmmaker stuff. What is your experience with both of those forums?
Well, we're most active on YouTube. My experience is very positive. I enjoy it. Some people might not. I really enjoy having the platform that you tailor yourself to get an audience out there. So you just sort of they give you a lot of resources. There's a whole studio down here now, YouTube Space LA, where you use their sound stages, things like that. And it's very filmmaker friendly. So I enjoy YouTube. I use Vimeo more professionally, I guess, to circulate things that I've done for review reasons or things like that. I'm not as active a Vimeo user. I feel like it's fine. It's a great thing. I just started with YouTube a long time ago, and it's just where I landed and stayed. I think 2008, late 2007 is when I first started on YouTube. So I just always just kept exploring it and moving forward with it. I enjoy it a lot.
Well, let me just ask then, do you have fears that if, let's say, you do get success as a filmmaker, that some of your voice will be eroded, that, you know, because if someone is putting up X amount of money, they may demand, you know, that their girlfriend has one of the lead roles in a film or something like that. You know, there's that, you know, choice you have to make, that sort of bargain with the devil. Do you ever have fears of that, that you're going to have to make compromises to your idea of film?
Fears, no. I mean, yeah, the short answer is no, not really, because ultimately you have a choice of whether or not you do the project. So if you feel like too many weird demands are coming upon you, I guess you could just say you don't want to do it. You know, so that's sort of a tender area. I get the other side of that is, yeah, I mean, if you're employed under a contract and things like that, that's part of being of the profession, is working with it. Mm-hmm. Is that a fear? No, I think it's just sort of what happened. You know, I mean, and you just have to figure out the best. It's similar to how you were talking about with working with an actor that might want to walk in from left or right, or come with a different perspective of the scene. Now you're working with an actor that you may have not chosen, but somebody else feels should be in it, and then you need to. Your job is to work with that actor to the best of your ability to get the job done right. You know? Is there a risk that it doesn't work out? Sure, but I don't think that's anything to fear. I think that's part of filmmaking. Mm-hmm. You know, that's the other side of it. But if you're truly independent and you're on your own, you don't. The ultimate thing is you just can choose not to do the project. So there's dual edge to that. Like, you know, there are certain projects you might be on as a director. For example, like a music video or a commercial, you'll have some influence, but not nearly as much as a label or an ad agency or somebody like that. And you'll have to work with it if you want to have the job. You can always turn the job down. That just comes down to a personal choice for the filmmaker. And then there's the independent side. Absolutely, if you're doing it all yourself, you can wait for the right moment. You can do everything the way you want to do it. because you're the person that's doing it. But if somebody's holding the purse strings and you're attached, and your job is to ultimately do what, if you decide that you are going to engage in the activity with them, that your job is to fulfill what you said you would do. So that would come down to the choice of whether or not you do it or not. But, you know, and there's nuances in between all of that that make it very complicated. Yeah. Like, why did the person come to you? If they came to you because of your sense of what you do, then you're not going to find yourself in that many scenarios. You know, they're coming to you because they ultimately respect all the decisions, most of the decisions you make. But if you're just kind of a hired gun, and you're the person that just lines it up and gets it done, fulfills the storyboards that the agency put together, well then you're going to have less to say. So sometimes you're one, sometimes you're the other, and that's just kind of it. That's the business, you know.
Okay. Well, you mentioned you were in film school. What were some of the films, your earliest films in film school? What were they? Genre films? Were they more experimental?
A little bit of both. The tasks in class ran both. You had to do things that were just images and tried to elicit emotion. You had to do a narrative. You had to do documentary. So they were kind of a little bit of everything. They made you go through each little different side of filmmaking, you know. So you kind of had to dabble in it all. Usually, if I got to pick what I wanted to do, I try to do something in the realm of suspense. I enjoy mostly suspense thriller or espionage thriller. I like the Hitchcock sensibilities of things. I like extraordinary circumstances for an ordinary person, mistaken identity. You know, I like that format. Those are fun. So those are the things I'm most attracted to, and I kind of tend to do so. That's what I did when I had the choice in school. But you know, but sometimes it was a documentary, and you got to pick the subject and the group or whatever, so you just do that.
Was it out in L.A., USC? Were you at film school?
No, I was at Montana State University in Bozeman,
Okay.
Montana.
Well, let me talk then after you got out of film school. I want to talk about Skypemare and Brentwood Strangler and your latest stuff, but what was some of the first films that you did with the Scary Endings people then?
Oh, man. So, okay. Well, I'll try and keep this story short. The short side of it is all of the people involved in Scary Endings I've known for at least 10 to 12 years, and we were all independently working over the last 10 or 12 years, and just recently decided to all kind of like, I've either worked with one or two of them at a time. So it goes back all the way that far. Ryan Dillon, one of the producers on Scary Endings, and Brentwood Strangler, he's also an actor, is the first person I worked with in LA, because we met when I first moved here, and we did a feature film together called Mercy. And I did that right out of school, and we did it to see if we could even do it, frankly.
And were you the director? Were you the director on that?
I was the director. We independently financed it, and it was you know, a very Hitchcock plot about a couple stranded in a house during a rainstorm, and they take in a stranger, and hijinks ensue from there. It has its flaws. It's not perfect or anything like that, but the purpose of it was to try and make something, you know, back then there wasn't all those digital cameras. There wasn't a lot of this kind of stuff. So it was like, can we even make a feature? So I think a lot of the energy went into just accomplishing the task, and we didn't think beyond it. Like, we weren't thinking about selling it. We weren't thinking about anything which, if I could do again, I would probably think more about that. But I didn't. It was more the challenge of doing it. And that's probably the very first thing that I did when I got here. And I worked with him. And then we kind of kept working together on the side. And I did a few other small projects. But then quickly kind of got embroiled because it did okay. It's with a festival circuit. I started writing a lot because I was getting a lot of interest in what I would write next. So not so much direct, and so I was doing a lot of script places, taking a lot of meetings for that, and you know, things that never materialized. They fall apart for various reasons. It's just the way it is. And then along with that, just started pursuing a normal career and became an editor and just kind of kept moving. And then just did films when we could. From then on, and so Brian, the other producer on Scary Endings, we met early on. He was an executive assistant to somebody at Universal Pictures, I remember, and so yeah, we just kept in touch, and he did his projects, I did mine, and we just always were friends, and we would all work together from time to time when we could squeeze in the time, and then we just kind of all decided, well, let's do this online thing is kind of interesting right now. Let's play some pickup games. Let's do intramural filmmaking.
Well, you mentioned earlier that Skypemare had gotten some attention. Was that the first film, short or longer, that got some notice? Because I've noticed that it's been reposted on many YouTube channels and whatnot.
Yeah, online. Yeah, yes. Online, yes. There was smaller ones, but that one made the biggest splash.
Yeah. And one of the things I mentioned before we started was that it was in looking for through YouTube and Vimeo and whatnot, you find a lot of very formulaic kind of films. You use this the term jump scare films, I guess, for horror films, where someone's alone or someone's walking on a beach or in a forest or in their apartment. Something comes, the MacGuffin, the Hitchcockian MacGuffin comes. They get a phone call. Something's at the window. They hear a knock or something. They get and after 2 or 3 minutes, they think they're safe. Then they turn around and the boogeyman or whatever it is gets them. Whereas with Skypemare, to me, it was a throwback to Rod Serling and the Twilight Zone, in that you had, or maybe almost Alfred Hitchcock Presents, his TV show, in that you have this lead character who thinks that her friend is getting murdered by some escaped prisoner, the sort of MacGuffin, and the prisoner who's killing the friend is supposedly sending her videos of what he did to the friend, but it turns out that nothing happened to the friend. It was just an elaborate practical joke, and in her panic, the heroine accidentally kills herself, and so there's that nice little twist there. How long did it take to come up with a scenario like that? Was that little twist ending, that Hitchcockian Twilight Zone kind of twist, was that the thing that led to the film, or did you have to work at that at the end?
No, I had to work at that.
Yeah.
The film started out normal, for lack of a better word. It started out the same plot that we're talking about, and then there was a version where she goes and hides in the closet, and somebody comes walking in, and she's got the knife, and she jumps out and stabs them, and it turns out it's her friend.
Mm.
There was a version where the person comes and hurts her. There was multiple different versions, and each time I got done with it, I wasn't happy with it, because I was like, somebody's going to think that's going to happen. Or especially the stabbing the friend. I was like, people are going to see that a million miles away. They're going to say, well, of course, you're going to accidentally stab your friend because it was a joke. Or, so it was a lot of the first draft of it, and almost all the elements that you talked about were always in place. It was just how it was going to end. And I had to count on that for a while on several different revisions while I sort of figured it out. And then I kind of went, hey, well, this would be cool, and I think it actually came up as a joke. I had her go to the kitchen and grab her knife and start running for the closet. And I wrote the line, "You should never run with knives." And it was just a little quippy thing to put in the script. And then I said, hey, wait. Yeah. Well, what if, and then that's just sort of how it happened. And I said, that's it. That makes sense. That would be the cruelest thing you could do to this person. Because again, and a lot of it is Hitchcock. It's like, I was a fan of Hitchcock Presents and those sorts of things. And the thing about those, or even Twilight Zone, And the thing about all of those is there's a little bit of snarky macabre that happens in any of those episodes. That is just sort of tongue-in-cheek cruel, and then that just so it resonated when I found that. I was like, yeah, that seems the right way. It should be that, and then I just kind of stuck with it, and it turned out a lot of other people seemed to like it too. So, but it didn't come right away, and it wasn't engineered around that kind of an ending. It came about from challenging myself to think of a better ending than just the normal.
And the next film that looks like you did was Brentwood Strangler. Was there anything between Skype-Mare and that, or was Brentwood Strangler the next film that you directed?
Brentwood Strangler was still my director. Yes. Yep. We did a few little PSAs for water conservation in Los Angeles independently, but no, a film was.
Yeah. Now that's also a short film, although it's about 2.5 times as long as the Skype-Mare film. Was that released online? Because I tried to find links to it, but I guess it's not online available in toto. It's just got trailers for it.
Right. Yeah. I think Adam may have sent you a private link. We are releasing that the end of this summer online, but we were letting it have its festival run first. That one we chose to do festivals.
Okay.
And so instead of releasing it online, we let it be exclusive to festivals.
And is that because of its longer length than on YouTube? Is it for example, is it better to have, say, 10 minutes or under online and 10 minutes and over offline?
No, it depends. Nowadays, especially on YouTube measures it quote unquote success not as much by views, but as engagement and watch time.
Yeah.
So how long you watch and whether or not you stay engaged is how they rank you now. Views, people can do it with bots. People can do it in all sorts of other ways. They can make promotions that might get a view for 15 seconds, but that they've discovered that's not quite as valid as if somebody watches it. So if it's 10 or 15 minutes online, it's not the end of the world as long as you're engaging people and it's even better if you can engage them for that 15, then they watch another one of your movies and they keep staying on your channel. They keep doing that, then you get ranked even higher, simply because you're commanding their attention versus going somewhere else. So, no, it was mostly because we wanted to try the festival circuit. Like I was saying, certain things might be worth something. We felt like we had a product that might play well to a live audience, and I wanted the experience of seeing what a live audience did to react, because it's a romantic comedy horror movie, so it's a weird genre blend, and I didn't want to only experience that through an online interaction. I wanted to physically see it, so decided to submit to festivals.
Well, you mentioned earlier that you're working on another film. Is that going to be a feature-length film over an hour long, or what is the length that's going to be? And is that also going to go on the festival circuit?
Well, there's a number of different films. A couple of them are shorts, and then, I am working on a feature. I don't know when that's actually going to come to fruition. I would imagine that if we did the shorts first, they would probably just go online and maybe also some festivals. But if I were to do a feature, I think we would probably try and do festivals first. Then, if we weren't getting the response we wanted, we would somehow release it online, or we can shop it around to a sales agency and get it distributed. But that's very. It's too early. We don't know. I don't know. I'm enjoying doing the small right now quite a bit, actually. There's no rush for me to go and do a feature film, per se.
Well, let me just ask you a question as an editor then, since that's your day job, and also whether we're talking about your TV work for the CW or the stuff you do with scary endings. There's an old saying that some film directors believe that a movie is actually made in the editing room. do you subscribe to that? And can you give an example, if you do, say either in editing a television show or one of the films that you've done by yourself, where you did an edit that really turned the episode or the film in a different direction that opened it up?
That's a tough question. I have experience with both, I think, I guess.
Yeah.
Obviously, Reflex, the project I was telling you about earlier, where it was very improv-based, kind of a Terrence Malick, Cassavetes sort of thing, almost like a French New Wave movie. That came together in the editing room. There's no question about it. We, finding the right performance, finding the pacing, down to the order in which it's presented. We're going to do an interesting experiment when we put it online, in that there's no order to watch it. You watch it how you want, and you might feel something different depending on what your first thing that you watch, for lack of a better word, episode versus the last episode you watch. If you watch it in a different order, you might think differently about it. It's absolutely wholly an experiment.
So it's sort of like instead of Memento being backwards to forwards, it could be like in a pentagram or something. The film could be in any direction.
That's right, and so in that regard, it's completely experimental. Like I would say that there isn't really even a plot per se. It's an experience. It's, you see these two people and you discern something from it. What you take from it is based on how you react. We don't tell you need to have this ending. We don't tell you that you need to feel this way. But that was it. And down to the composer, he got the reels and he sat down and he sketched the music out, and that was the soundtrack. Mm-hmm. So it's all totally experimental. So that came together in the edit, and we spent a long time editing it. We would put it together. And what I mean by we, the actors were very involved with me in this thing. Like, I edited it, I directed it, I quote-unquote wrote it, in that I came up with the scenario, but then the actors involved. So there's no real writer. There's a scenario creator, I suppose. And then I would put it together and then show them, and then we kept experimenting with it, moving things around and going, well, what if? And sometimes we shot some supplemental material and we put that together. So it was a process, and that definitely came together more like a documentary would, or more, Brentwood Strangler, I don't want to say a movie never comes together in the edit. It certainly does, in that performances are booked, pacing is crafted, and that's all very important. That's what helps tell the story and keep people engaged. So there's always some level of editorial involvement that helps create the product. But you have the alternate experience when, if you've planned like you're saying for Hitchcock, if you've planned your shots and you're working with a director, like when I'm just editing, that isn't me, that has a very solid sense. I mean, the way they do their scenes, it is so concrete that you can kind of go, well, that's where I come in, that's where I go out, and then it's dealer's choice in the middle for pacing and rhythm. But the scene is directed, and it's clear that it's directed, and so you're influencing it, but not nearly as much. You are there to enhance it, I would say. You're not there to create it. And then there's times you're there to create it, or in the TV show sense, you might be over the total amount of runtime that you can be, but all this great material has been shot. So you have to kind of, rather than just butcher and drop scenes, you try and figure out, can you make it work? And so you go through a phase where you might move some stuff around and play with it a little bit. And then in that case, it does come together in the edit. But it's not really. I would not say that it's as much as involved as a documentary or other programs. Usually, and I've never worked on a feature film as an editor that isn't mine. do, and the people I've heard, usually where that term you're talking about comes into play is when you're talking about a running time. A movie, the first cut of a film is 3 hours or 4 hours, but they only can do 2 hours and 10 minutes or whatever. They have to get incredibly inventive to create the flow and to make sure they get everything in that the director wants and the team wants. And that's I think where that works in terms of what you're talking about as far as narrative.
Well, I will link to the Scary Endings YouTube channel and a few other things for you. Let me just ask a final question then regarding the future. I mean, obviously you'd like to, I'm sure, be able to make a living just off of your own films. But what do you envision if that were to happen? Do you want to still just do genre films, the Hitchcockian stuff, or do you have like an idea to maybe do an autobiographically based film about, you know, your own life as young? Do you have like a project that, you know, before you're dead, you'd love to make this movie, you have to make this movie?
Not any sort of autobiographical one about me. There's trying to think. I mean, I think, yeah, that's a good question. I have wanted. I don't know what the story would be yet. I don't know who. I think eventually it would be fun to do a personal interest or human interest story, a person overcoming a struggle that's a real person. You know, there's people from history that come to mind once in a while. I've always thought the story of Valley Forge would be interesting to tell. I've always thought, you know, sort of the expansion west would be interesting. The story of the Pony Express and how short-lived it was. If you could create a thing about that, those sorts of things about our history and who we are, I think would be the bigger dream project, because to do it really well and to do it accurately and to not fall prey to over sentimentality and try and be honorable to a period like that would be sort of I guess a dream job as a project. Mm-hmm. In the meantime, I particularly like to do intrigue and suspense, so I think I would just have fun with that and I think that's the key word, is have fun with it as much as possible as I matured and grew. You know, and then eventually when I felt like I was emotionally intelligent enough to tackle the larger subject, I would then explore doing it.
Well, thank you for spending about an hour speaking with me about films in general and your career. So again, thank you, John Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, you got it. Thank you.